Tai Chi, and it's my honor and pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Paul Bowman, who's a reader in this school and who is the author and editor of countless books and a world-leading expert, among other things, on Bruce Lee. As for today, he's going to be giving a talk which is titled Primitivism After Orientalism, which promises to be extremely exciting and full of lots of exciting good stuff.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you all for coming. This is kind of two conversations, and it's work in progress. On the one hand, I've been talking to a group of PhD students who are represented here about some issues in cultural theory. Hello. And the issue that we've most recently been discussing is Orientalism. So Orientalism, I'm using Orientalism in the sense as theorized by Edward Said in his groundbreaking 1978 book of the same name called Orientalism. And Said argues that Orientalism is a kind of systematic discourse, a systematic misrepresentation of the Orient. So by the Orient he means specifically the Middle East, but you can generalize this to the Far East. And these are the kind of types of artistic image that Said, artistic and literary images that Said says European literature and culture has consistently organized their understanding of the Orient by way of stereotypes, simplifications, and fantasies that have little, if any, connection to the actual existing conditions in any geographical area that you could call the Orient. So the question is really, to what extent does Orientalism still exist? Because when Said's book came out, it was controversial, and he seemed to be saying that for a designated period of time throughout European history, there was a systematic style of representation of the Orient, and that this was an epoch, and that this was a consistent, long and large-scale discourse that you could see in cultural practices, and that had an impact on the way that, don't worry about those words, the way that Europeans thought about, conceptualized, and dealt with the Orient. So the question is, to what extent does Orientalism exist? Hello. To what extent does Orientalism still exist today? And in the seminar last week with the PhD students, we decided that it does still exist, but is it still this dominant regime of signification? Is it still this dominant discourse? And it exists in the sense that, for example, Mo Farah is always stopped at US immigration because of his name and because of his skin colour. I mean, it said it's got a bit less bad since he started to win Olympic medals and so on. But also Orientalist prejudice. This guy might be a terrorist because he looks like a terrorist. So this is a kind of Orientalism in practice. And you can also see Orientalism in certain places, like you can see in holiday brochures, the deliberate exoticization of places in the world. So that's a discourse that's quite Orientalist. And you also see Orientalism in peculiar ways played out in cultural practices, in what you might call self-orientalization, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is also this is me thinking about a way of engaging with the topic in to do with martial arts that I'm working on. Because when you deal with martial arts in popular culture, martial arts films, say a Hollywood martial arts film, it's very easy, and this happens all the time, it still happens. You will read your academic article about Kill Bill or Bulletproof Monk or whatever it is, and the whole analysis is organised by how Orientalist it is. So you get a scholar who knows all about Chinese films, and they'll get really annoyed at the Hollywood versions of those films, and they'll go, they're so Orientalist. And that's the conclusion. That's like, oh no, Hollywood trades in stereotypes, isn't this a really bad thing? Right? Now, a long time ago, in the mid-90s, late 90s, Ray Chow argued that that shouldn't be your conclusions anymore. We shouldn't be looking at the production of, say, Hollywood and being surprised to find stereotypes and simplifications. Like, what do you expect to find in a Hollywood film exactly? What do you expect to find when you see a representation of Chinese martial arts? It's going to be Orientalist through and through. Let's just go, okay, there's Orientalism in that sense. But what else is going on? What else is going on? And is this really the way we have to organise our discourse and our knowledge about these interesting moments of cross-cultural exchange, such as martial arts films, which are places where people from different cultures can become interested in the activities and practices in different cultures. So no matter how fake these things can be, a Hollywood martial arts film, or even a Hong Kong martial arts film, no matter how fake, it can still have a real effect. It can be a kind of cultural translation or a cultural encounter. So I want to ask questions about the stages of Orientalism. Was it a historical epoch? Has it come to an end? Or was it just a kind of a style of scholarship that kicked off in the wake of Edward Said? Did we all start seeing Orientalism because Said said, look how Orientalist we all are? So if it's going, or if we can only do a certain amount with it, it's easy to look at things and go, Orientalist, sexist, racist, and therefore bad. But is that all that's going on? And what other kind of conceptual categories might replace it? So I'm thinking about martial arts. So if you're not interested in martial arts, then you can think of martial arts as a case study. And what I want to talk about is a slightly different set of concepts to do with cultural encounters and thinking about what's going on culturally in the globalization of martial arts. Now, in the West, in Europe, in Hollywood, in America, in Canada, the martial arts were always Oriental. They were always Asian, Chinese, or Japanese. These were the two countries. And there's a history of the Western appropriation of or relationship to Eastern martial arts. Now, this is the trailer for Kung Fu, this was an enormously influential and rubbish film and then television series. 1972. This is often people's first contact with any kind of Asian martial arts. And you can look at the history of the Western, say, film, media, television, cultural relationship to Eastern martial arts. And you can find that it's been overwhelmingly Orientalist. It's always been bound up in these narratives of the mystical East, the mystical other with its hidden secrets and blah, 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 blah. So the Orient has always been represented in the West as something that contains hidden secrets. So Westerners have gone off to try and find these secrets and gain access to these secrets. And from the 60s and 70s, the 1960s really is where you start to see Oriental martial arts in Western films, in James Bond films, in Hollywood films, in Elvis Presley films. You start to see martial arts. So the 60s and 70s are a period of mythologization, really. It's a kind of the mystical Orient, and this is what Westerners are desiring, and they're getting involved in martial arts to the extent that they can, in the absolute belief that there are mystical Oriental secrets that they will discover, okay? And then through the 70s and 80s, which is the Kung Fu television series, is the best example, but you go through characters like, obviously you've got Bruce Lee, and then you've got the blaxploitation films around Bruce Lee, because there was a strong connection between black audiences and martial arts films in North America. So you capitalize, never mind the films. And then they become more and more mainstream, and you start to get the whitening and the westernization of martial arts films. So the really key figure here is Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris, who everyone laughs about now. You have to say Chuck Norris and people laugh. But Chuck Norris was an enormously influential figure in the westernization of martial arts. He was really the first white authentic martial arts star because he was an authentic master of Hapkido or Tang Sudo or Taekwondo or whatever. So through the 70s and 80s, you get it mainstreamed and it becomes normal. It becomes more westernized. You know, once the Kung Fu master isn't Asian, but is white, once it's not Bruce Lee, but it's Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, then that's a transformation in the status of the martial art. And through the 80s, through the 80s and 90s, martial arts become thoroughly westernized. And this is the only thing I want to show you with sound. And it's well worth it. Mute on, mute off. 100%. Okay. Now this, well, just see what you make of it.
Welcome to the dojo. You can call me Master Ken. The art you are about to learn is called the Meridote. It's the practitioner, not the art, that makes all the difference. Every martial art has its strengths and its weaknesses. Except for ours. That's what's amazing about Meridote, is that it's really a blend of the best parts of every martial art in the world. That's why we like to say, best of all, worst of none. I have studied at over 36 martial arts facilities. In the past 17 years, not one of them has been able to contain me. Name a martial art. Bullshit. Name a martial art. Karate. Bullshit. Name a martial art. Bullshit. Yeah, Kung Fu is bullshit. Bullshit. Meridote. Perfect. Step forward.
I was in a court-ordered anger management course, and I discovered this studio and the people here, and it helps to get my aggression out.
I've always kind of wanted to take some kind of martial arts ever since I was a kid and I saw The Matrix. And then I came here. It's really close. It's like 2 minutes from my house. I can walk. It's pretty cheap. Like cheaper than a movie, much more entertaining. There's like always something weird happening here. And there's girls.
Let's say some guy gets up in your face in the street, sticks his finger out, puts it in your chest. Here's what you do. You're going to secure the wrist, then you're going to break the finger. Break the wrist, break the elbow, break the jaw, smash the groin, break the nose, break the knee, break the ribs, reach off the groin, knee drop the pelvis, kick the head, stomp the head, stomp the back of the neck, reach off the groin, and exit out. Then if you have anything in your pockets, you can use to hit him, stab him, whatever. Yes?
Is that really necessary?
Well, no, if you have anything in your pockets, you just drive over him.
No. The whole thing seems a little excessive. The guy gets in your face and so you basically disable him for life.
Hopefully. But I'll tell you what, while he's in the hospital, you're at home with your family.
Until you're on trial for attempted murder.
Better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
What if he was asking for directions?
And he should have asked from across the street.
So there's an awful lot to say about that. This is a wonderful kind of recent internet television series, and it's about a Meridote, which is a martial art that's totally schizophrenic in relation to anything Oriental. It's very, very conflicted. I mean, a Meridote, it has these kind of perfunctory references to Oriental. They're still wearing the sort of uniforms, but it's a denial that anything could be superior to what he has constructed himself. Best of all, worst of none. And it's a kind of, and it illustrates a strange thing that happened to Western martial arts increasingly through the 80s and certainly through the 90s, which involved the discursive and institutional appropriation and reconstruction of supposedly Oriental martial arts within an American or European organizational system, complete transformation of the states of these things, still with the trappings of a relationship with an Oriental history, Okinawan or Japanese or Korean or Chinese. But actually, this is also, you can see that it's a mess, it's a jumble, it's a nonsense. So this is a kind of 2000s, or do we still call them the noughties? This is a noughties reflection on something that happened increasingly through the 80s and 90s. And since this time, from about 2000 onwards, it's a question: can you still periodize? Can you still historicize the development of martial arts in this way? Does it continue to be Orientalist? Does it continue to have any kind of relationship to Asia? And I think the answer is that it doesn't. It has changed quite a lot, and it doesn't necessarily have to have any relationship with the Orient or East Asia at all. And I would characterize the last 20 years of martial arts in the West as we don't need to know any outlawed combat moves, we've just learnt them all, as characterized by a period of deconstruction. Now, by deconstruction, I mean lots of different things, but a deconstruction of tradition, and actually one of the trailblazers, perhaps the most important character in this process of cultural and institutional deconstruction, was Bruce Lee. Because Bruce Lee actually, he went to America when he was 18, and he hadn't actually finished any syllabus. He hadn't finished Wing Chun. He wasn't a Kung Fu master. He was just good. And when he went to America, he started to kind of hybridize and do what we call now cross-training. So he would use kind of the American football shields to train with. He had people make training equipment that was much more scientific. So he took out a lot of ritual, and he took out a lot of Chineseness. He took away all reverence for tradition. He actually disavowed any connection with Kung Fu at all after a while. He said, I'm done with it, I'm finished with Kung Fu. He was much more interested in finding the best of all and the worst of none in the construction of his martial art, which at one time he called Jeet Kune Do. So, in the last 20, Bruce Lee was doing this in the late 60s and early 70s, but it's really only caught on since the 90s in martial arts, where you see an increased mixing and hybridizing of different styles, the grafting together of different things. And I think it's largely been premised on the dissemination of different sorts of media. This is exponentially exploded since the advent of YouTube. So what's that, 5 years? How many years? Forever. We've had YouTube forever, haven't we? We've never not had YouTube. And you see a deconstruction or an eradication of the idea of hidden Oriental secrets in martial arts. They just, that anyone who thinks they're going to start learn Tai Chi and they're going to learn some essential hidden secret, that's less and less common now. And you start to see more something that Bruce Lee blazed a trail in, which is the demand for processes of verification. All right. So your martial art is the supreme martial art. Show me. How would it fare against a wrestler? How would Kung Fu fare against wrestling? How would karate fare against jiu-jitsu? How would how does this work? And this discourse has been this was dropped like a bomb on the world in 1993 with the birth and televisation of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. Now the UFC did precisely this thing. It claimed to pit style against style and individual against individual, and the UFC completely and utterly transformed the way that martial artists thought about martial arts, and it became a very, very different thing. You also see in the West the emergence of military martial arts. You get a disconnection of a need for any kind of I'll pause it on Dan in a second there. You start to get a disconnection of any need to have any claim of connection with the Orient. So this is illustrated again by Master Ken. Master Ken doesn't have any claim of connection to the Orient. And now in martial arts discourse you have a connection with the street. This is the key term, the street, but also the military. Military martial arts are become much more on the agenda. The idea of Marine Corps martial arts, for example, or Special Forces martial arts, which indigenize or kind of appropriate martial arts practice in a different sort of a way. Hello. You also, quite interestingly, through this period of time, get a shift in the idea of the discursive centre of martial arts, which for many years was always located somewhere between China and Japan. That's the centre of, that's Mecca for martial arts. But in the last 2 decades, the Mecca of martial arts, the centre of martial arts, is now really the Philippines. Philippines is the place where people go, oh yeah, that's where you get that's the real martial arts. And you also start to see the emergence of different sorts of TV formats, which I'm very interested in, and I'll maybe get a chance to talk about slightly. You start to see the emergence of what you might call reality martial arts programs, reality TV, and you get the quest. So you get obviously you get the Americans going east, which you could say, this is still an Orientalist narrative, but they're going east, and they're going east for a fight. And you also in Hong Kong television, you start to get the production of reality formats where people from Hong Kong, they've had an interest in Thai boxing, or they've had an interest in kickboxing, and they go into China to learn, what's it like to do Tai Chi in Wudang, what's it like to do Shaolin. And so you get this, and this is all mediated and mediatized thoroughly. So you start to get a much more of a fluid relationship between different cultural practices and different practices of martial art. And in the West, and this is a discourse that is really kicked off, you get a desire for a kind of universalism, a kind of universalistic desire to establish what's the best and to construct the best martial arts scientifically. So martial arts discourse has become less cultural and more scientific, but of course by scientific you also might mean westernized. It's supposedly deracinate and it's supposedly universalist, but actually is this just another example of westernization? And there are all sorts of interesting battles currently going on around whether they should even televise the Ultimate Fighting Championship in China, because what's that going to do to traditional Chinese martial art? There is a genuine worry about this Western invasion. It's a Western cultural invasion around China. So you get, what I'm saying is you've got this discursive transition from something that's very, very cultural to something that seems to be very, very scientific and rational and logical. And you see much more scientific equipment and nutrition and so on in martial arts. But at the same time as this, and this is where primitivism comes in, you have the emergence in... it got me. You said it when it did. You see the emergence of a discourse of what I'm going to call primitivism. Now this discourse of primitivism is exemplified by the Ultimate Fighting Championship and the new martial art born in this way called MMA, Mixed Martial Arts, and Fight Club. Because if Fight Club is about, what's it about? It's about, what does Tyler Durden tell us all the time? Tyler Durden tells us we've been softened up by consumer culture, we've been feminized. So the discourse of Fight Club, and people of Henry Giroux and lots of other scholars have pointed out the way in which it's a very, very kind of sexist film, where it takes everything out on women. It blames women for the emasculation or the crisis of masculinity that Tyler Durden talks about. So Fight Club is a discourse of let's break free from culture. Culture is limitation. Culture makes you soft. And let's have a fight. So it's about getting in touch with your masculine animality, your primitive masculinity. So the primitivism that you see in, I'm calling it primitivism. The primitivism that you see in Fight Club is one that comes as a response to kind of consumer culture. So Fight Club is the emergence of a type of primitivism. So I'm saying on the one hand you get Western martial arts discourse going scientific and also going sporty, but also going primitivist. So what do we mean by primitivism? Now, Ray Chow wrote a book in 1995 called Primitive Passions, and She argues the following. These are 7 points that I'm going to read out about her argument of what primitivism is. Number 1, the interest in the primitive emerges at a moment of cultural crisis, at a time when the predominant sign of traditional culture is being dislocated amid vast changes in technologies of signification. So a period of cultural crisis. In such a context, fantasies of an origin arise. These fantasies are played out through a generic realm of associations, typically having to do with the animal, the savage, the countryside, the indigenous, the people, and so forth, which stand in for that original something that has been lost. So it's a reaction, a nostalgic fantasy reaction to some kind of technological cultural crisis. This origin is reconstructed as a commonplace and a commonplace, a point of common knowledge and reference that was there prior to our present existence. The primitive, as the figure for this irretrievable commonplace, is thus always an invention after the fact, a fabrication of a pre that occurs in the time of the postmodern, the post-colonial. The primitive, defined in these terms, provides a way for thinking about the unthinkable as that which is at once basic, universal, and transparent to us all, and that which is outside time and language. Because it is only in this imaginary space that the primitive is located, the primitive is phantasmagoric and literally exotic. Now this is the long one. This is an important one, if I think about China, which we might be. In a culture caught between the forces of first world imperialism and third world nationalism, such as that of 20th century China, the primitive is the precise paradox, the amalgamation of the two modes of signification known as culture and nature. If Chinese culture is primitive in the pejorative sense of being backward, being stuck in an earlier stage of culture, and thus closer to nature when compared to the West, it is also primitive in the meliorative sense of being an ancient culture. It was there first, before many Western nations. A strong sense of primordial, rural rootedness thus goes hand in hand with an equally compelling conviction of China's primariness, of China's potential primacy as a modern nation with a glorious civilization. This paradox of a primitivism that sees China as simultaneously victim and empire is what leads modern Chinese intellectuals to their so-called obsession with China. And then finally, although there may be nothing new about reinterpreting the past as a way to conceive of the present and the future, and this is definitely one possible way of understanding primitivism, my proposal is that this structure of feeling finds its most appropriate material expression in film. So Ray Chow is arguing that there's something particular to do with film that enables a sort of expression of primitive passions or any kind of cultural passion. So what I'm proposing, thinking through what happens after Orientalism. Is Orientalism still a useful paradigm for us? And Ray Chow's suggestion of primitivism and primitive passions as a way for thinking about the status of the other, the exotic, the savage, the primitive, the ancient, the timeless, is that you see a movement in different sorts of directions. And to simplify, but I think this is defensible, in the West, you see this emergence of a new type of primitivism, which is not based on history, but based on a fantasy of timeless animality residing within each one of us. It's kind of like a Freudian id. That's the primitive that contemporary Western martial arts are getting at and getting to, with this idea of no system, no rules, no culture, just violence. And I think I may actually have some clips of early UFC competitions. This is lovely, you'll enjoy this. So this is what the early UFC kind of looked like. It's not Kung Fu, is it? It's not Tai Chi, it's not Wai Fu, it's not Taekwondo, it's nothing glamorous. It's very, very brutal, very animalistic. And this has risen to the surface. It's been reined in slightly, somewhat, but this is the ideal in a kind of Western discourse of martial arts. At the same time as this, if you look at what's happening in Hong Kong and Chinese and East Asian martial arts discourse, you see the intensification of a desire for for culture and for tradition. And you're getting, so this is the American trailer for the Grandmaster, which is the Wong Kar-wai film, which is kind of supposedly meant to be about the life of Ip Man, who trained Bruce Lee, but it's not really about that at all. It's about how do you unify China, right? How do you unify China, and how do you respect tradition? What is tradition? What is China? And so you get this kind of intensification of a nationalist discourse in Chinese cinema and Hong Kong cinema in particular at the moment. And there are other films as well that are interesting, and I said I would talk about them, but I've spent more time talking about theory. So this is Wong Kar-wai, and the choreography is Yuen Wo-ping. But then you also, at the other end of the artistic spectrum, this is artistic spectrum, big style. You would have a film like, oh no, this is good, this is different, sorry. You would have a film like Keanu Reeves' latest first directorial effort, which is a film called Man of Tai Chi. And actually I think that it's a rubbish film, and it's a disappointment. Well, I actually liked it, but it's going to be a flop. It's not going to be classic, timeless. And it's a real pity, I think, because what you see played out in this international film, it was co-funded East and West, American funders, Chinese funders, directed by Keanu Reeves, starring the guy who was his fight choreographer, his fight trainer rather, in The Matrix, Tiger Chen. And it's precisely about this thing. It's about tradition, which is Chinese. It's about tradition versus something that I'm characterizing as Western, which is primitivism, this primitive animality. Throughout the film, Tiger has to fight more and more bloody death matches, right? Secret, illegal ones. At the same time as he's also competing in a televised competition where it's meant to be style against style. It's meant to be, Tai Chi versus Xing Yi versus Bagua versus whatever. But Tiger becomes brutalized because he becomes sort of westernized, and it's scandalous. And at the end of the film, it's a victory for tradition, which is always a victory for China. So I want to not go on for too long. I want to draw some conclusions. And I think if I draw a conclusion about primitivism after Orientalism, I think that the title of the talk is literally that this is what you see this is what has risen to the surface in Western martial arts discourses. Orientalism was there at the start, historically it organised people's interests in martial arts, the desire for the other, the mystical, the mysterious, the secrets of the Orient. That has now completely receded, and that is much more marginal now in Western martial arts. And what's much more common is a kind of westernized, scientific, animalistic or sporting approach to MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But Orientalism it's really coming back in a big way in China, in a big way. So this is what we might call self-orientalization, right? And it's a process, I think, that's connected strongly to nation building, to a sense of, you often see Hong Kong films that are kind of obsessed with the relationship, the thematic relationship between mainland China and Hong Kong, because that's still quite a new thing. That still needs to be established. There's still an antagonism there. Is Hong Kong China or is Hong Kong not China? And you see an interest in tradition and history in these martial arts films. There's also the problem of censorship, of course, so they have to be not too critical of China. But so I think that Orientalism now does still exist, and it exists very powerfully in the nationalistic discourses, ironically and perversely, of Oriental countries. Orientalism would be one way of characterizing the official cultural policy of an awful lot of what goes on in China, either in regards its PR and its advertising of itself as a place that Westerners might not want to be scared of, but might want to go on holiday or settle business. And it's also ideologically important in order to reconstruct and build one nation, because it's quite a big place with many different languages. It's as important as establishing Mandarin as the language all over China. So, and then my third interest, and this is my interest in terms of thinking about martial arts, is that Ray Chow has argued that there's a primacy to vision, and vision is never neutral, and vision is never natural. Vision is always organised in some way. So you can argue that the ways that Westerners have thought about their martial arts practice has been reorganised and reconstructed, and an Orientalist paradigm or viewpoint has diminished. At the same time as you can see Orientalism being alive, and a way of looking, and a way of thinking, and a way of conceptualising China in Chinese discourse. So there you have it. That's my presentation, and that's what I'm thinking about, and that's what I'm going to argue in at least one chapter of the book. So what it would be nice is if you give me some brief about that, challenge me. That'd be smashing. So I'm done there.